All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are a minute past 8. So let's get our intros going. Welcome to EPEW 2021, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephanie, and I'll be moderating today's session with the help of Kayla and Andrea. We have a great session lined up for you today. We have Jack Rolfe, and they will be sharing more insight about when are we playing a game. Gosh, if I had a penny for every time I heard that, it'd be crazy. A few things before we get started. We are going to attempt to keep our cameras and microphones muted during the presentation in order to avoid interruptions. As we are using Zoom for this session, sometimes things may not work the way we want it to work, so please be patient. If we have any major issues, we'll send out an email with updated Zoom information during the session. If you have a question, please use the chat feature. Jack has asked to have the questions answered during the session. So we'll go ahead and pause for questions as they come up. If you make any posts on social media, we ask that you tag EPW and also use the hashtags EPW 2021 and EPW family. Without further ado, here is Jack Rolfe.
Awesome. Thanks very much. It's cool to be here. I feel like we're connecting a few dots in a way. I'm an Englishman in Australia, and obviously you guys are in the US, so it's 11 o'clock at night in Perth, Western Australia, and obviously you guys are waking up, enjoying your breakfast and having a coffee, so it's great to have you with me. And thanks to the guys for organising a great lineup of workshops and events and stuff, so really nice to be here. My first question to you all is, what are you expecting? What do you want by the end of 9 o'clock today? When we log off at 9 o'clock, what do you want? What would you like? What sort of stuff are you challenged with? What are you excited by? Why did you say yes to come to get up early on a Monday morning and join in? So maybe just in the chat box, a couple of answers. Why you're here? What are you looking for? And by 9 o'clock, what do you want to go away with? So if you just pop that into the chat box, and I'll share my screen in a moment. So by 9 o'clock, when we log off, what do you want? What would you like? What are you expecting from the presentation? What are some of your challenges around this sort of stuff? You know, teaching through games, class sizes, all that sort of stuff. What would you like by the end? So what are your expectations? We get a couple of answers into the chat box. Small-sided games, questions. Free myself up to move through lots of group sizes. Nice. Anybody else? Getting back into teaching after 4 years, staying at home with the kids, looking for new ideas and ways to engage. Awesome. Hopefully, Emily, by the end, you'll have plenty of ideas to take away and you'll be full of energy to get kick-started again. Alrighty, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go from there. Sweet. As I said earlier, thanks very much for getting up nice and early and getting involved and engaged. This is definitely not a formal lecture. My job is definitely not to talk for 60 minutes and for you guys to say thanks very much at the end. We want lots of conversation. We want lots of interaction. A bit of background, spent a lot of time within education in the UK before moving across to Australia. Going to work in education, but also in various different sports settings, which I'll dive into a little bit later. Why am I so passionate about this sort of stuff? Because I wasn't a massive fan of school, but I had great PhysEd teachers. And I would love as many great PhysEd teachers as possible. So we're halfway there with you guys joining this morning to get involved. A bit of background, I'm dyslexic. So if you see any spelling mistakes, advanced apologies in the presentation. But I think that plays a lot in terms of how I see education, how I see PhysEd. but also the experiences that we want to deliver through that as well. Most of my sport would be field hockey. A failed international athlete growing up, again, an influencer in why I'm so passionate about creating great experiences and learning through the game as well. So my first question to you here is, what is a game? So if we're talking about when are we going to play a game, well, what is a game? So pop your answers into the chat box of what is a game. So it could be one word, two words, you decide, but just pop your answers into the chat box. What is a game? Fun interaction. Interaction is probably the biggest word I take out of that one. I hear fun all the time, and I think it's a given, but the interaction is a really important one of how does the teacher interact with the game? How do the pupils interact with the game? So great one, Sarah. An activity in which you use your body, space and mind. Awesome. I call games brain games because I very rarely believe you just play a game, actually play a brain game. So I'm pleased you said the mind there as well, and body as well, always thinking about the interactions and the skills involved with that. Awesome. Anybody else? What is a game? If we was to look at answering the question, maybe what are the components of a game? What are the components? So movement towards a goal, yep. An activity that may build upon levels that challenge each student, yep. Where they are right now. Awesome. And it's important on that one of where are they now, but where do they need to be? So it's often I go into a lot of environments and see a lot of adults try and coach and teach the adult game to kids. You know, you're not looking to develop the next Olympian in the next 10-year-old. Actually, it could be 20, 40 years time, you know, that sort of stuff. It's a little bit longer. Using skills to achieve a goal. Emily, when you say skills, what sort of skills are we talking? Are we talking sport-specific skills? Are we talking psychosocial? What sort of skills are we talking? If we get some stuff around, what are the components of a game? So if you're looking to build a game, what would your game have within it? And I think the Mario Kart probably gives you a little bit of an idea, potentially. Social, emotional, physical. Right. Top stuff. As we say, as we move through this presentation, just turn off your mics and just shout out. Absolutely no problems with that at all. Here's how I see it. You'll notice straight away there's a games console in the middle because the game sits at the middle. The game sits at the center of everything we do. And these 8 components, believe that if we can have these 8 components, you're probably not going to have the question asked of when are we going to play a game. So is there some sort of player-led controls? We know that young people like to be in control. So how much responsibility are we giving them to have player-led controls? Some sort of scoring system. So basketball is a really good example because there's different types of shots with different types of points. So what is the scoring system you can add into your games to promote a certain action to go forward? Choice. To me, choice is probably the biggest motivator you can give anybody, adult, kids, whoever it is. If you say to a kid, you can either go to bed in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, they're probably going to say 10 minutes, and they're probably going to own that decision because you've given them the question to answer, rather than say you have to go to bed now or you have to go to bed in 10 minutes. So you've given them the choice and they feel empowered to take that responsibility. Task and mission, and some of you guys mentioned that around goal. I would always frame it as probably mission because it's more cool and it connects with the language of the people that we're working with as well. Decisions. I would always talk about how long into a lesson is it until your pupils are making decisions. And I talk to the coaches about this in various different settings as well. So you take football or soccer, for an example, 2 lots of 45-minute halves. You wouldn't wait until the 30th minute to make a decision. So why wait to the 30th minute in a lesson to make a decision? So how quickly can your pupils be making decisions? And we can talk about some stuff later around how can we set up little games when they first arrive to make those decisions happen straight away. Levels and progress and process, sorry. So where are you starting? Are you starting on level 1? Are you starting on level 5? where can you give that choice almost? You might actually say to a group, you can start on level 1 or you can start on level 3. So you challenge your mixed ability group within that as well. Some sort of feedback. The game is the best form of feedback. And if you're working on your own, which a lot of us are as teachers and educators, the best form of feedback is the game. Because ultimately we're preparing players to play volleyball, to play basketball, whatever it might be. The game form is the best form of feedback. And opposition. And this is a really interesting one. And doing a little bit of work in coaching settings, there's always a battle between a drill, which would be unopposed and quite boring, pass to A, B, C and follow your pattern. Or is it the interaction between a five-a-side sort of game? So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a combination of both. So I spent a bit of time in a basketball college recently, and they have a great game called 180. So at the start of every single lesson, they have one team down one basket, one team down the other basket. It's a race to hit 180 points. So they have different types of shots, but they know as soon as they arrive, they're going to play the game 180. So if you play the same game, you get some consistency on the feedback, because week 1 we're here, week 2 we're here, but there's the choice, there's the decisions, but technically it's unopposed because it's a little bit of a pattern. And there's a scoring system. So when we talk about opposition, it doesn't always mean it has to be, I've got to play a game against somebody else in the normal form of game that we might see. It might be, different stuff like that. How does this relate to people? Any reflections, anything we've missed on here? Anything in the chat box coming through on that one? And here's a few things we can have in our toolkit to use as teachers and as coaches and educators, that if we're going to get asked this game of when are we going to play a game, we need to know what's in our toolkit. So what can we use, what can we pull out to support that question not to be asked? But also, someone mentioned earlier the interaction. And the interaction for me is probably the biggest thing. So when we set up a game, the educator's role is not to go and grab a coffee and chill out and think, actually, they're playing a game, so they must be learning. Actually, the interactions are probably the most exciting bit. So can you give some player challenges? Can players set some goals, or can you set a challenge for a player or a team? You might play in different playing zones. You might just play in half a basketball court rather than a full court. You might just play in down the left side or down the right side, so using different areas. Opportunities to lead. You might play the game in 3 lots of 5 minutes rather than 15 minutes, so there's best of 3 series. So there's opportunities for players to lead. The second ball is a really big one for me. So if one ball goes out of play, handball or soccer or volleyball, whatever it might be, the ball goes out of the court, you as the educator should have the next ball ready. So their decisions are really, really quick. So the time, between as one ball leaves and the next one goes is super small. So they're always making decisions. Pauses and replays, and that's probably taken from a bit more of a gamification sort of angle, that actually connecting that to that opportunities to lead. You might say pause. Can they make some decisions? What do they need to change? Or I love a replay, so I might say to, Stephanie, okay, you've got a replay. So you press pause, replay to make a different decision. So you give the ball back to them and you say, all right, replay, make a different decision, and you go. All right. Okay, question for you. Challenges when learning through games in classes. So what are your challenges? So TGFU, game sense would be a core part of education, but what are your challenges around delivering it? So if you pop your answers into the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself as well. So what are your challenges when going through this sort of stuff? What are some of your big struggles when you think, okay, we're going to set up a game, or we want to learn through games, we want to do some TGFU game sense? What's the stuff that's banging through your head, some of your challenges? Learning the rules. Vanessa, is that from a player perspective or a pupil perspective or a staff, adult view? Kids get too competitive, said things aren't fair, being too aggressive, 60, 70 per class. Keep children's focus. Fear of failure. Kayla, why do you say that? Why do you say fear to failure?
I feel like a lot of my students are hesitant to try out a new skill. They like to have it modeled and have time to practice before they put it to a game. So sometimes in the game setting, they are still hesitant to show off what they know.
It's I ask a lot of kids when I go into different environments and support teachers, coaches, and whatever, and I say to kids, "What are you really good at?" And they always struggle to tell me. Probably because we don't speak about the stuff that they do really well, and we always speak about the stuff they need to improve. And often a game is connected to that. So there's this traditional belief that we play the game at the end of a lesson if there's good behavior, or if they do a certain type of skill correctly, which baffles me, because actually the core skills of the game are probably understanding space, moving off the ball, change of direction, change of speed, a lot of the movement patterns that are connected to other sports and not necessarily the technical skills. So if you take one thing away from today, it should be that the game is not a reward for good behavior at the end of a lesson. It should actually be the thing you probably start with as well, and you're going to get bigger confidence. Limited equipment, large class sizes. Julie, how big are your class sizes? Hamilton said 60, 70 per class. And Hamilton, what sort of space are you working in with those pupils? Have you got space to set up 6 games of 5v5? What facilities are you working in? Under construction right now, we have limited space. Hopefully when construction's finished, you've got loads of space. And it probably links back to some of this this second ball reaction sort of stuff. So I would do a lot of stuff with 3 teams. So 2 teams play, 1 team rest, and it might be first to 3 points or first to 3 goals, however you frame it. And then you just rotate through, or you set up a little mini round robin tournament. So you play as a group of 3, and then you progress to the next one as well. We can go through some ideas in the next few slides around that as well. I suppose another real way to get going, particularly in PhysEd, when people are going to change at different times, coming from all different spaces around the classes and whatever, might be actually set up some sort of game, or you have some sort of equipment out as pupils arrive. So when they do arrive, they can go into a game straight away. So you're giving them a beer, but you're giving them a piece of equipment, so they're setting up their zone. And then by the time players are there, you're not having to wait for all 70 pupils to be there to start the lesson. Actually, you're starting the lesson as soon as one pupil arrives, as soon as somebody else arrives. You might be a little 2v2 or 3v3, and you just build up as you go. And this connects back to the stuff we're going to speak about in the next few slides, and the reason that we created MatchPlay Cards as a resource to hopefully remove all these challenges that you talk about, to give players confidence, to give pupils the space to make decisions, to be adaptable, and not to restrict you as an educator. So totally multi-sport. The yellow ones, we're going to talk about them later, but probably my favourite, because every time you ask a kid a question, they give you yes or no answers, whereas actually that doesn't check or challenge any learning at all. And you can not turn up to the lesson and still give the right answer if you ask the right question. So we designed a shed load of cards just to kickstart conversation, to capture learning experiences, and probably in and around some of that stuff around 60 to 70 pupils. So we might give some challenges and some cards per team. So this is what we're going to explore in the next few slides. And yeah, jump in, ask loads of questions, so you get plenty out of it. And you can see a few of the organisations that we do some work with across the world, all different sports, all having the same challenges as yourselves, and all having the same enthusiasm to learn through games and to play through games as well. So we'll share some examples from a few of the organisations on here as well. So this is not going to be just one sport. There'll be loads of different sports we're going to tap into. And this first one is a secret mission. So you spoke about it. You said mixed ability groups. You said player confidence might be low. You said limited equipment and large class sizes. So you may actually set some individual challenges to players without telling the rest of the group. So if you set a challenge to one person, but you tell everybody and they don't achieve it, that person's confidence probably is going to go down rather than go up. Whereas if you give them a secret challenge where nobody else knows, oh, there we go. Guys, am I unmuted, I think now? Yeah. So secret challenge. So it might be that you're not going to tell everybody else what's happening. You're just going to do a bit of drive-by feedback. You're going to give it to one pupil and you're going to just see what happens, or one team and see what happens. And why would we do that? Why? Because that interaction, or that individual's interaction with the game, will increase because they don't feel like they have to go and meet a set criteria and go and please the whole group. So it'd be really different if we told everybody exactly what that player was going to do and that individual was going to do. So we might set a secret challenge, secret mission, and then the learning and the interactions come from, at the end, we might say, what did you notice about player X or pupil X? And ask them to see, well, what did they notice? Or what did you see? What did you feel when this person was in possession or out of possession? So setting individual missions and secret missions, but not telling everybody else. So can other people recognize that as well? And you can see here, so it might be that actually, particularly in the large class sizes, that you have the rolling subs, so people rolling in and out all the way through, and those players are then choosing cards for their own teammates, choosing secret missions for their teammates to go on and play, asking the opposition to try and recognise and see what's happening. And I'd give some choice to the players over this. Why? Because I'm always curious as to what they choose. Do they choose an easy option or do they choose a hard option? So which one do they choose is an interesting point as well. But if they choose a challenge for themselves, they're probably going to feel more ownership over it. So you might lay them down as they arrive at the class, or pre-select a few cards that you think would relate to the lesson and the sport, and let them have some sort of ownership over the responsibility. And this might be another one. So you never ever go into a game, whether it's soccer, NFL, volleyball, basketball, field hockey, whatever, and know exactly what the opposition is going to do. You have a bit of an idea, but you never know exactly what the opposition are going to do. So how often do you set the same challenge for both teams in your lessons? Often quite a bit, probably. But if you set different challenges, different cards for two teams, they're almost working against each other. So you'll see team one is going quite defensive, so looking at some skill sets in and around the defending elements of the game, in whatever sport it might be, compared to team two that are looking quite attacking. See different challenges for different teams to try and work out, to find a way to win, but also to connect some of the skills and check and challenge some of that learning to go forward. As we're going through the presentation, just drop some responses in terms of where do you think this sits into your lessons? What are you reflecting on? What are you thinking as you're listening to this? What are you thinking? Where would this relate to some of the stuff? Do you do anything similar at the moment? So team one, team two, different types of challenges to go. Stephanie, maybe you can share some ideas as well. I think you've obviously got a few sets and use them. What around some of this game sort of stuff? Where do they sit? Stephanie, are you there? There we go.
I'm here, Jack. Yeah, so I really like the secret mission idea, because oftentimes I do play the card where I have one player playing on both teams, and oftentimes it's a highly skilled player, so it kind of gives them the chance to be able to contribute to both teams. That way it's not that standout student. It's like, oh, he or she, or they're so good, it's not even fair that they're on that team. So I put them on both teams. I play that card a lot. And when I see that there's a common skill or concept that everyone needs to work on, I might throw, I've spoken to Jack before, the floor is lava. So I'll apply that card to everyone, because I feel like this, period 2 class definitely needs to work on creating space and movement. So I may play a card for the whole class if it's something I think that everyone needs to work on. And it's really important. These cards are cool because like Jack said, once you start to get to know your class, you can start throwing different challenges like the team 1, team 2. If you know that team 1 can benefit from, learning or working on defensive skills, then you'll throw that card in for them. Or if team 4 really needs to work on offense, really needs to work on communication, and involving all of their players, maybe you'll throw in an offensive concept card. So that's kind of how I use them. And I do a lot of times pre-select these cards. So I kind of take a look at them, take a look at, the class that I'm going to use them with, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. And I kind of pull out cards that I think are going to help that class, that team, that particular student. Maybe a student needs a little bit more TLC. So it's really cool.
It's cool that you mentioned kind of the psych stuff as well. So actually looking at developing somebody's confidence or communication skills, not just the PhysEd skills that we would talk about in terms of technical skills. It's nice that you mentioned that decision making, communicate, adaptable sort of stuff. So here's just an example. Teacher at the front of the class, 1 card to one team, 1 card to another, pre-selects the cards but faces them down, so there's some sort of choice, but the players don't know what that choice is, but they're in control of their decision. So they think they've chosen the card. Actually, the teacher's pre-selected cards that fit to the focus, which is a smart move, and spoke about the interactions. And then they go away and they get involved and they play. This other one that we mentioned around levels. So actually, you might just put 1 card in for both teams or for the whole class, but with lots of little mini games set up around your football field. And you might say, okay, you can start on levels 1 to 3, and you decide what level you start on, but it's the first team to hit 50. So some might say, okay, I'm going to start on level 1 or level 0. And some might say, actually, we need a bit more help, so we're going to start on level 3. And actually, you could set 2 teams up, because I could play against team 1 that are on level 3, whereas I'm on level 1. So there's a difference. And then you're almost playing a game within a game. So the game is not how many goals you score, it's the process of how you get there and that journey and that experience to go and to achieve that eventual outcome. So in a lot of sports, only 1 person can score and only 1 person will go on a team sheet. But actually this sort of stuff gets more people involved and isn't always connected to the most confident people. That person scored again. So it's different people involved in a different process, feeling part of a journey together. And you'll see pictures like this, and you'll see interactions like this. And this is probably one of my favorite images because it connects an adult with a kid, but it puts the game in the middle, which ultimately is what we want to do with the cards. As we get older as adults, the kids get younger, which creates that relationship to make it even harder. So we have to think like a kid. We have to think like a player. We have to try and beat the game and know the game and get involved. But it creates these sorts of interactions that I might give a pupil a challenge. I might give a team captain a challenge. I might have a couple of players in a small huddle. But it creates these sorts of images, which are immensely powerful because we know that young people want ownership, but they also want connection. They want high challenge, but they want high support with that as well. Looking at different sports that have, you can have a netball sort of stuff. It might be different zones. So different areas of the football field might have different cards. So if you're in one zone, it might be, okay, the floor's lava. You can only spend 4 seconds in one position. Whereas in the goal scoring zone, it might be different types of shot. So you can't score the same type of shot, same type of goal twice. So different cards in different zones would be a really easy way, particularly for a bigger class, to break it up and put different challenges in different zones. So if you had 4 areas of the field you were playing in, you might put 1 card in every zone for players to challenge. And here you'll see, again, interaction between the pupils as a group and the teacher. But the smart thing here is getting the pupils to say the cards. So actually you see this young man here is, you know, got a disability with got a hearing aid, but actually because he's the one delivering that message, his experience of the lesson is very different. Rather than listening to the teacher, excuse me, rather than listening to the teacher deliver the message and maybe finding it hard, actually transfer that responsibility, give that responsibility to a certain player to speak up, grow that confidence to the whole group to go. And we spoke about earlier that one of your biggest challenges is probably around the types of questions that you ask. So we created 50 plus different challenge reflection cards in and around all this sort of stuff. So it might be that we put them in small groups. So if you had 60 in a class, you might go into groups of 5. You put one card per group of 5 at the end of a lesson, and you let them have a couple of minutes to share their experiences, to share their reflections on maybe the lesson itself, but also the experience and the game that they've had and they've learned that they go and take away with it. So it'd be a really easy way to check and challenge learning without having to stand at the front of a class and deliver one question to 70 pupils or to 60 pupils. So really sharing that to go a lot wider. And all based around these sorts of stuff, you know, so your actions and your possibilities about where you're going to go next. But one thing we did, and we're really, really important about it, that it wasn't what did you do wrong and how can you change it? So it's not about the negative stuff. It's actually about the experience of creating a bit of a story and a journey of what you're having to then going forward. So you can see some stuff around, you know, what's got you thinking, what are you curious about, which is good feedback for the educator of the class. You know, an undercover agent wants information about the opposition. What have you identified? So it might be every 7 minutes you might play a different game, where you put a new card in every 7 minutes. So you allow a couple of minutes in between when they're going to get a drink or they're changing teams, whatever it might be, but you're allowing some sort of interaction to go. And here's one way that we would use it in a class setting. So I love a whiteboard, and I also love people to write down their responses rather than verbally talk them, because I think actually some pupils prefer to write than they do to articulate and speak. So we would often put one card in the middle of in the sports hall or the sports centre when the players leave or arrive, so you can decide whether it's at the start or the end. One question on the board or a couple, and they have to write down their responses. They have to write down their reflections. And then, you know, like I've done here, you take a picture and you check and challenge that. So maybe week 2 of term compared to week 7 of term. Well, here's the types of responses. Here's the types of questions that we're going to get out of that. So different cards for different things, but checking and challenging that learning to go. And you get little huddles like this. So you'll get little kids just having conversations, and you haven't always got to listen. So actually, if you go and give them the card, you might just step back and let them have some sort of space to think. And you don't always need to hear the responses back out of them. So often we would feel that we have to hear an adult type response, but actually you're narrowing down the types of conversations they're having because you've given them or they've selected a card that is relevant to the lesson. And I would also use names of pupils. So I might tell a certain pupil to deliver that message or to share the information back. So it's not always the loud kid sharing that information. So it's always, okay, I'm going to give it to player or pupil X because I want this pupil to have this interaction and this relationship with the experience. It might be that they have to go and listen to another group and then go and take their 3 points from one group and go and give it to another group. So it's not always teacher-led. The teacher-led bit is actually the cards going out to different players and different pupils. Particularly in the summer, we'd leave them near the water bottles. So when they go and get a drink, there's questions down on the floor. And they don't have to tell you the answer, but kids are curious. Pupils are really curious people, and we should encourage that. So actually just leaving and planting seeds for information for them to have conversations to go. Question for the group: how do you check and challenge learning when you have such big classes? So how do you check and challenge learning when you've got 60, 70 pupils in a class? So if you just pop your answers into the chat box. How do you check and challenge the learning if you've got such big class sizes? And someone's also put here closed captioning for the deaf participants. Just give us a little bit more information on that one. We can have some, we can talk about that a little bit more. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Maybe watching them during the game. Nice. Think pair share in small teams. Yeah, very much like this sort of stuff. Peer-to-peer is huge because they listen to their own peers probably more than they do us at times. And we shouldn't be scared of that. We should encourage it. But how can we make that experience even more? So it might be some stuff around the cards. Exit slips, nice. Watching them in the game is good feedback. But how can you check that learning even more? You know, so some people will do it, but can they articulate what they're doing? So some of the best players will share the information, share the feeling, share the experiences, and create a bit of a journey as they go. Online, yeah. Students write their answers. And I think it's really important that pupils have a say. So thumbs up, thumbs down is great, but can they have even more involvement? Can they have even more interaction with it? Because you might give cards that are actually connecting one lesson to the next lesson. So a lot of times I would put, at the end of one lesson, I might put a couple of questions to the group and get some early information out of them, ready for the next lesson. So they're actually primed from lesson 2 to 3 when they come to the class. So lesson 3, we're going to look at this, but actually lesson 2, we're going to finish on some questions that already relate to the next lesson, ready to go. Raise the roof. Nice, awesome. And so going back to that, can we have deaf participants, if that person wants to ask that question maybe over the microphone, because I've just put iPhone, so I don't know who that one is. Awesome. Walk and talks, Andre, give me a little bit more. What does that look like?
Yeah, so it could be at the beginning of a lesson or at the end of a lesson. Most of the time I do it at the beginning of a lesson where I write a question on my whiteboard. I use a whiteboard at work. And my students choose a partner, or maybe I tell them, you know, get into your teams. And I give them a question about maybe the previous lesson or something that we're going to work on. Maybe like you mentioned, priming them. Maybe it's a new skill we're learning, but anyways, they have conversation with each other, and then they just walk around, you know, our area before I even take attendance. Or I've done it where it can be like a cool down, right? So let's say they were just, you know, moving about in a game or something like that, and I'm getting ready to wrap up the lesson. Instead of bringing them in and having them sit, they just cool down maybe around the basketball court, let's say, and they have conversation about the question. And I always try to make sure that I let my students know, like, hey, make sure that each person has a chance and opportunity to answer. And then at the very end, before I wrap up class, then I ask for some share outs.
I love how informal it is without being, or I love how formal it is, but actually quite informal, if that makes sense, because I don't believe that reflection should be structured. I don't believe it should be, you have to write sentences and pages of words to have a reflection. So that walk and talk stuff and that interaction is wicked. It's awesome because you're not making them confined to a space where they have to give you a certain type of answer. There's a bit of freedom to go forward. Someone's put the accountability here, and I suppose my response to that one would be, if you're going to give them a card, they've got to share their responses. So if you give a certain type of question, there's a certain type of response that needs to come back. So the cards that we've done, it might be replay your favourite moment, or the coolest thing you saw a teammate do. So actually the accountability is from the answer that they give and how they deliver that. So actually they may have to go and deliver that feedback to somebody else within the group. So that's where my idea of that accountability comes from. Anybody else? Andre, you can share a little bit. Andre, you can share.
Yeah, I really like you mentioned, Jack. It's very, for me, it's very informal. I just want to see where their reflection is, where their head's at in terms of the question. The way I keep them accountable is sometimes during the walk and talks, I just choose a random, pair or a random group, and I go have conversation with them. And let's say, they're in a group of 4 and, they're walking, I join that group and I say, hey, Kayla, what is your thoughts on this question? Or what are some, challenges or anything like that with the question or the skill that the question asked, So I do it that way. And then again, like Steph said earlier, you get to know your class, you get to know your students. So then if I have a group or some students where I know they need more accountability, I go to them first, right? And I make sure, and if they're not on task or if they're not having conversation about, let's say, the question, then I said, okay, let's work on it. I'll come back to you. I want to hear your response. And then I go check in on someone else and then obviously eventually go back.
I also believe that if a pupil doesn't give you an answer to a reflection card, it doesn't mean they haven't reflected, or it doesn't mean they haven't learned anything. Actually, I look at the pupils that I work with, they're almost not confident enough to share that in front of everybody. So it might be you go and speak to that pupil when everybody's going away, and then you go and check in with that individual. And we know that if you're going to give them a card, it's going to narrow their thinking. So when they do leave the lesson, they're probably thinking around the stuff that you've spoken about, because you brought their attention and you focused their eyes into something. Really grateful for your time. Happy to answer any questions you've got, share some ideas that you've got. What are your takeaways to go forward? You can find my details online across social media, and the cards are on the link below. So whatever sport you're in, junior, senior grades, come and give us a shout. Really happy to answer any questions. And again, wherever you are in the world, we can get them to you. I'm happy to answer any questions and share your reflections to go forward.
Okay. Let me wrap up here. Thank you for watching today's session on Why Are We Playing a Game? Special thank you to Jack for an epic session. We're so thankful that you have given us your time and your knowledge and your expertise on this subject, and allowing us to get to know a little bit about the MatchPlay cards, which are amazing, by the way. We're going to do our best to load this session onto YouTube. We have a lot more amazing sessions coming up during EPEW 2021. Please visit our website, epew-cp.weebly.com. That's where you get to see all of the sessions. We do have one share time today on advocacy, and then our social to wrap things up for day one. It's BYOIC, bring your own ice cream. And then all live sessions require a link that you should be receiving via email. So make sure you are checking your email, maybe even your spam, just in case it's getting thrown into that spam folder. I believe Matt said these emails are coming out at 7 a.m. Pacific time, of course. So make sure you're checking emails. So if you do have a live session, you're getting those Zoom links. All right. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming to learn with us and leaving as family. Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thank you for attending the 48th Annual Elementary Physical Education Workshop. We're glad you were here.
Please follow us on our social media platforms. EPEW can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Please check out our website for links to more great sessions. Just go to epew-cp.weebly.com and click on the virtual EPEW 2021 tab at the top and scroll down.
EPEW 2021 Educators Assemble would not be possible without the support and dedication from the amazing EPEW committee. The committee has been hard at work for months preparing for this workshop. Thank you to Linda McGee, Barbara Grattan, Scott Wilson, Stephanie Sandino, Julie Miller, Jessica Monlux, Kayla Ailman, Shelby Lozano, Andrea Chavez, Scott Townsend, and Cindy Chase.
Thank you for attending EPEW, where our motto is, come to learn, leave as family.